afternoon, depending on where you are watching us. And let me please begin by thanking Mariana and Ida for having invited me to this webinar. As you see from the title of my presentation, today I would like to talk about some statistical data concerning the representation of women and children in Syrian terracottas. However, before discussing quantitative and qualitative data, I need to explain to you the structure of my speech and the challenges currently involving the study of Syrian cultural heritage. The data are presented in chronological order, beginning with the early Bronze Age 4 and concluding with the Persian period. I decided to start with the end of the early Bronze Age because before, figurines are extremely rare and they are almost exclusively zoomorphic. Although the paper deals for the greatest part with figurines retrieved in current Syria, I must also specify that it would be more appropriate to talk about Syro-Anatolian region. Indeed, several sites considered in this research are today located in southeastern Turkey. For each period, we will first observe the ratio between the representation of female and male figurines. Then, only for female subjects, a focus is addressed on their visual features. With this regard, I anticipate that in Syria, female bodies are rarely represented as pregnant and never performing delivery. Not only, but the way children are portrayed also reveals some substantial differences with respect to other Levantine regions. As we are going to see in a while, the diachronic approach presents some limitations. Indeed, the Syrian coroplastic productions, as a part of the local material culture, largely reflect social political fluctuations. That means that not all historical periods are equally represented in terms of available data. The quantitative data also depends on contemporary issues, such as the scholarly perspective or the number of excavated sites per period. But most importantly, the fact that fieldwork in Syria is frozen for more than 10 years due to the civil war. Moving now to the first analyzed period, namely the early Bronze Age 4, I have attempted to illustrate in the map the currently known micro-regional productions, which, however, do not really reflect the complexity of the local material culture. For this period, we only have one regional study by Farhan Sakal, who analyzed more than 2,000 figurines from the Middle Euphrates Valley. Within this region, we see a real explosion of terracotta manufacture, and we could even identify 4 distinguished productions. Along with the Middle Euphrates, one can also observe other productions linked to a few major political centers, such as Hama, Ibla, and Mari. During the early Bronze Age, the ratio between male and female subjects greatly varied depending on productions. For instance, in the Middle Euphrates Type 2 production, the most popular one, genders are pretty much balanced. However, we can generally observe that female subjects tend to slightly outnumber male ones, especially in those productions with a limited regional diffusion. In this period, apart from a few exceptions, figurines are freestanding and pillar-shaped. Decorations are clustered around the head, and then the visual focus is upper-centered. Decorations are abundant regardless of gender, and then the distinction between the two sexes is mostly based on gestures and a few occasional anatomical features, such as the presence of the breast or the bird. Regarding female figurines specifically, the majority are dressed, since the pubic area is already represented. There are, however, 2 Middle Euphrates productions showing naked figurines. Also, naked figurines seems to appear only towards the end of this period, anticipating the most popular theme of the Middle Bronze Age. The gestures are much varied and spans from the hands covering the breast to the very popular breast cupping gesture, or the hands on the abdomen, until the introduction of the outward protruded stump arms, which is again an anticipation of the Middle Bronze Age gesture. In this period, we can observe a general low occurrence of female figurines with children, but compared to the following periods, this percentage is rather remarkable. Children appear only in the Middle Euphrates area, and this local tradition, as we will see, will be resumed in the coroplastic art only 12 centuries later. During the early Bronze Age, children are portrayed as newborns or very young infants, and they are positioned whether on the side, while breastfeeding, or in front of the chest. Lastly, this is the only historical period in which children are associated with both dressed and partially naked female figurines. Another very complex and somehow partially documented production is that of the Middle Bronze Age. For this period, the most detailed regional study has been produced by Niccolò Marchetti for Talmardich. The scholar was also able to distinguish other several micro-regional productions, which, however, present rather common features. During this period, we can still see a predominance of female subjects over male ones. The decline of male subjects, usually portrayed as riders or seated figures, is particularly remarkable compared to the previous period. At Talmardich, for instance, male subjects are only 14% of the corpus. Marchetti has also estimated that in other Syrian sites, their average ratio between female and male subject is 2.7 to 1. Namely, female figurines are more than twice as many as male ones. Another interesting data is the total absence of children, which is quite bizarre considering that the Middle Bronze Age was probably one of the most prolific periods for coroplastic production. For what concerns female subjects, during the Middle Bronze Age, we can observe a dramatic change towards an exclusive naked representation of women. Indeed, female figurines are portrayed with their breasts uncovered, often provided with nipples and a visible pubic area. The rendering of the pubis becomes progressively more naturalistic, starting since the Middle Bronze Age too, and in concomitance with the production peak. That's to say that the focus on these figurines must have been stressed in this part of the body, with all related consequences on their meaning and use. Indeed, to favor the shaping of genitalia, we can further observe a gradual abandonment of the pillar bases. At the level of gestures, we witness a continuation of both the breast cupping gesture and the outward protruded stump arms. Moving now to the late Bronze Age, we could say that by far this is the most poorly studied period for Syrian coroplastic. As you might see from the map on the slide, not only we do no longer have a mass production, but the sites where you can find terracottas are very few. To date, only the Amuk plain production has been thoroughly studied by Alexander Prus, while the only site with a readable contextual evidence is probably Tammuz Baka. During the late Bronze Age, with the introduction of the molding technique stimulated by the Bolognani production, female subjects are still predominant, while male subjects are almost absent. The dominant subject is certainly the so-called Astarte plaques, named in this way because they have been linked with the cult of this goddess. Although most of these figurines were retrieved in domestic context, the link with the cult of Astarte could be explained by double evidence. On the one hand, the very first figurines of this type appeared in Mari and Tarka, in the transitional phase between the Middle Bronze Age and the Late Bronze Age. In Mari, the Astarte plaques sometimes are not only naked, but they also hold a tambourine, a musical instrument which appears associated with Ishtar dancers in the Mari text. On the other hand, some of these Astarte plaques were also applied to miniaturized models of terracotta shrines, a fact that has led some scholars to believe they were images of the goddess herself. The Astarte plaques are depicted as standing nude women performing three types of gestures, namely holding the breast, with one hand cupping the breast and the other one at the side, or both arms along the side. The hairstyle is simple and always divided into two hair locks, sometimes clearly resembling an anatomic wing. At an imaginary level, as you might notice, the focus is rather diffused, since jewels are reduced to the minimum and the glaze can fully focus on the shape of the body. Contrary to the Southern Levant, where these ladies are systematically portrayed with a slightly rounded womb, suggesting an early pregnancy, the Syrian figurines are rarely so. Generally speaking, they do not seem to have much to do with maternity, as if the original Southern Levantine motif here was not fully developed. Conversely, what seems to matter here is the youthful splendor. Children are consequently scarcely associated with the artefacts, and the few available images are quite unique from an iconographic point of view. For instance, at Mombasa, we have a single figurine portraying a naked female holding a child who seems seated on a low stand while grasping the mother's breast. To this example, we might tentatively add two reliefs from Hama and Tel Judaida, found both of them out of context. In both iconographies, next to the lady, a standing child appears. Another poorly documented period is the Iron Age, for which I've recently proposed a regional study for my doctoral research. My study was anticipated by Alexander Proust's analysis of the Mook plane and the publication of the Telapis materials by Paula D'Amore. In this period, we can still observe a contraction of the coroplastic production, except for the Middle Euphrates area, where we see a sort of revival of the early Bronze Age tradition. In any case, despite the limited evidence, I've been able to identify 6 micro-regional productions with slightly different chronologies. In all these productions, we can observe again a dramatic change with respect to the preceding period. Apart from zoomorphic specimens, especially of equid types, which are the most attested types, male and female subjects are equally represented, usually men as riders and women as standing pillar figurines. Conceptually speaking, however, considering that riders are associated with equid figurines, the male counterpart seems visually dominant. Women are generally portrayed, dressed, and embellished with rich decorations in the upper part of the body, especially around the head and the neck areas. The breasts appear rarely, and they are not really used to represent nakedness, but gender instead. Indeed, during the Iron Age, there isn't any attempt in stressing the sexual aspect of female bodies. On the contrary, sexual markers are often hidden, as suggested by the most diffuse gesture, consisting in covering both breasts instead of cupping them. In 2 earlier productions, we can also observe a faint continuation of the PCI gesture, which was probably influenced for the Amuk playing by the Messenian tradition. For what concerns the representation of children, these last do not appear for the greatest part of the Iron Age, but only towards the Iron IIb-III periods. Furthermore, in the late Iron Age, children are included in the coroplastic production of only 2 microregions, the Middle Euphrates and the Amuk plain. As you can see in the slide, the association of children with pillar figurines, even in the Amuk plain, is a tradition likely exported from the Middle Euphrates. It is indeed in this area that children are linked to the so-called Syrian pillar figurines. Although numerically ephemeral, for the first time, children are dressed as adults, and sometimes they even mime their gestures, notably the most diffuse one. A fact that, in my opinion, suggests an involvement of children in public performances, as also testified by the occasional presence of anthropomorphic clay rattles. Not only, but this involvement also seems to be extended to all ages, with both newborns and standing children being represented. Several contributions have been published about the Persian period productions in Syria, although none of them with a regional approach. The first two studies, where we see an attempt in classifying terracottas, have been written by Paul Jürgen Ries in 1948 for female figurines, and by Joseph Eli in 1991 for male ones. Both studies have been updated in the last years thanks to the publication of stratified figurines from Tel Mardikh, Tel Denit, Tel Mastuma, Jebel Khalid, and those from the Yamuk Plain. What we certainly know is that in this period, the core manufacturing area was in northwestern Syria, with a production peak to be identified in the region of Aleppo. The Persian period production is mostly characterized by an almost equal presence of the so-called Persian riders and the apparent revival of the Astarte plaques. Although the two groups do not always appear in the same sites, what is interesting to observe is that male and female figurines are sometimes merged in single terracottas. So, if on a contextual level, these two groups might seem separate, in reality, we know that there was an interaction between genders. Regarding the female imaginary specifically, during the Persian period, we can observe some novelties in representing women. Namely, along with the classic dressed and naked standing versions, one can also encounter semi-naked figurines and, above all, occasional female riders. The attestation of these riders is particularly important since these figurines have been frequently interpreted as a representation of Astarte. But their representation as riders, in my opinion, contradicts this theory. Instead, this figurine seems to have represented some female figures at different stages of their life, or status symbols, as stressed, for instance, by their gestures and their hairstyles. Thus, along with the long-lasting tradition of the breast cupping gesture, usually confined to naked or semi-naked figurines, we can also observe figurines holding a blue lotus flower or a tambourine. Naked figurines with a prominent belly, which were not popular in the late Bronze Age, are now instead attested. Another aspect stressing their likely human nature is their costume. In particular, the dentate tiara already encountered in Western Persian art as a symbol of high-status women. Children in the Persian period are represented in very peculiar ways. First of all, while in the Southern Levant, chorotropoi are incredibly popular, these are simply not attested in Syria. Instead, children are associated with both male and female riders. Sometimes, their facial features are oddly rendered, adopting the same molds of the Persian riders. By utilizing this expedient, perhaps in response to their irregular presence, infants with births are produced as a result of iconographic distortion. However, thanks to these expedients, it is the first time that we can distinguish the gender of children. Concluding the paper, let me please point out a final observation which stands quite clearly from the presented data. Although the compared corpora are different in size and any precise statistical analysis can be currently put forward, in any case, we can see two trends. During the early Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and the Persian period, when the gender ratio is rather balanced, children are equally represented, albeit in limited numbers. However, when this ratio is overbalanced in favor of female subjects, and especially naked female representations, like during the Middle and Late Bronze Ages, children tend to disappear from coroplastic production. And thank you for your attention.